Thank you all for joining us. This issue really goes back to January, where there was a $600 million potential cost shift to counties that was certainly unworkable for any county in the state and would have had a significant negative impact on local discretionary revenue and really county services and programs across the spectrum. So for in-home supportive services, counties are very fortunate in that the 5 years prior to this, there was a maintenance of effort that was put in place that capped our exposure at the same time that the in-home supportive services program continued to grow at a dramatic rate. And so when we got to January and the administration attempted to shift the $600 million to us, would have really created a substantial impact to counties. Throughout the spring, CSAC, joined by our officers and also a number of CAOs representing rural, suburban, and urban counties, all worked together to negotiate with the administration to really provide a level of certainty in terms of counties as to what you can expect for costs on a going forward basis, to limit the exposure that we would have relative to any IHSS cost shift, look at the uniqueness of some of the smaller counties in the state, and really provide to meet a reasonableness test in terms of what can be absorbed within the overall realignment structure. And what came out of that as part of the May revise was an agreement that included a maintenance of effort, and so we have clarity about what our costs would be for in-home supportive services, included an annual inflator that is 0% in the first year, 5% in year two, and then 7% going forward. Also provided some revenues, new revenues to offset that cost shift. That included state general fund, a significant amount of that, declining over a few-year period, as well as some other revenues dealing with sales tax to apply to in-home supportive services. So that was put in place, and given our concerns about the long-term sustainability of this deal and impacts to counties, we also negotiated a reopener that Justin will talk further about, but it provides an opportunity for us to ensure that there's sustainability of the costs and the associated revenues that are present to fund them over the long term. Following the May revise, there was two budget trailer bills that have moved through the legislature. The first is SB 90, and so that includes the many complexities of to implement this deal. That's the primary bill, was included as part of the budget package in June. So that has the vast majority of the details related to it. And then the second piece is really a cleanup bill that AB 130 that was recently signed by the governor and ensures that some of the references in terms of the bargaining language are appropriate, and that there's some other cleanup related to the calculation of caseload growth in IHSS and how that would be funded. What I'd like to do at this point is turn it over to Justin, and he's going to walk through the key components related to the maintenance of effort methodology that's in place. Justin.
Thanks, Graham. And so, as was mentioned, one of the key provisions in the SB 90, the trailer bill that implemented the IHSS agreement, was a requirement that the Department of Finance would consult with CSAC in the development of the new county MOE. And this would also specifically meant, the determining what each county's individual MOE amount is. So CSAC has worked feverishly since the bill was signed into law in order to implement this in a fair and equitable way that makes sense for counties and that takes into account all the different factors. So we convened an IHSS MOE work group with CAOs and technical experts from rural, urban, and suburban counties to best represent the state and the counties in this process. I really want to thank all of the members of the work group for their commitment of time and dedication to this effort. It was really a lot of calls and meetings in order to determine this cost shift and offsetting revenue. And so essentially what this work group needed to do was determine how much of the increased costs would go to each county with the cost shift, and then how much of the offsetting revenues that were available would go to each county as well. So in order to do that, we gathered all of the available data we could from the Department of Finance and Department of Social Services in terms of data on expenditures and services and caseload and hours and all of that in order to inform our effort on this. So essentially every county had a starting point. Each county had their final 16-17 MOE from the prior MOE, and then they had a 17-18 starting base MOE, and this was the result of the 3.5% inflator from the old MOE to get to the 17-18 starting number, as well as the incorporation of some annualized wage adjustments. So from that starting point of the 17-18 base, there was $592.2 million added on in a cost shift to counties for IHSS. To help offset that cost shift, there are these available offsetting revenues that Graham mentioned. So in the first year, there's $400 million in general fund that was available to distribute to counties. There's also the redirection of some realignment growth funds. So for the vehicle license fee growth, growth funds that would have gone to health and mental health are redirected to the social services account to offset IHSS costs. In the same way, funds that would have gone to health and mental health for sales tax growth are also redirected to offset IHSS costs, and within both of those there is specific revenue that would just be growth funds to county medical services or CMSP counties. And there's 35 CMSP counties, and those growth funds are only available to be used by those 35 counties to offset IHSS costs. The final piece of offsetting revenue that's available is accelerated caseload growth. So sales tax is first used to pay off caseload that is owed, that has been incurred in prior years. And so the sales tax will now, moving forward, will be accelerated so that counties will receive this throughout the year instead of at the end of the year. And so this is another revenue source that's available to help offset these IHSS costs. So essentially the work group had to determine, with all of that cost shift and with those offsetting revenues, what amount each county would receive in the most fair and equitable manner. So within the new MOE, there's four components. There's the services component, there's the IHSS county administration component, there's the public authority administration component, and there's the case management information paralleling system, or CMIPS components. I'm going to talk first about the services component because that's really the main one. It accounts for 95% of the increased costs as well as 95% of the corresponding general fund offset. And it's where we spent the most time as a work group determining how that would be divided up. So every county, as I mentioned, has their 17-18 starting base, and this base came from the original MOE 5 years ago being set based on 2011-12 expenditures, and it's changed over the prior MOE period based on locally negotiated wages and benefits that have been incorporated into it. And so using this MOE base as a factor in determining the cost shift, there's a number of advantages to this. It reflects stability to a county's current share of the existing MOE, so that's important. It also incorporates locally negotiated wages, and in terms of what impact they may have on the cost shift, that's incorporated into the methodology. So that is one factor that is used to determine the services component of the MOE. The other factor is looking at annual hours growth. So the growth in IHSS provider hours has increased significantly over the prior MOE period, nearly 37%. So we can calculate a percent to total for each county of that growth based on their growth in that same period, and that gives them a percent to total of the growth in hours. And looking at that is important because there's been a tremendous amount of increase in hours in the program and thus incorporated increased costs. And so being able to use that as one of the factors in determining how to divide up the cost shift reflects where that growth has occurred and where it may be anticipated to grow in the coming years. So determining each county's percent to total of the MOE base and the annual hours growth, they're combined together equally into a methodology that gives one overall percent to total. And this percent to total was used to determine how much of the 95% of the cost shift that services each county would receive and how much of the corresponding 95% of the general fund offset each county would receive. So that's how that part of the methodology works. For the other three components, it's a little more straightforward. For county administration, it was based on the most recent 12 months available of actual county administration expenditures and each county's percent to total of that. For PA administration, it was based on the most recent 12 months of expenditure data that was available for PA administration, each county's percent to total of that. And for the CMIPS component, it was based on the numbers provided by the Department of Social Services, because that was the best available estimate in terms of the actual costs associated with CMIPS. And so once you combine those four elements together, you have an overall MOE that reflects the addition of the $592 million cost shift, and you can calculate each county's percent to total of that to determine their overall percent to total of the cost shift. And from there, that is essentially your larger MOE number. The general fund offset is applied off the top at the state level. So there's your overall MOE number, there's your amount, each county's amount of the state general fund, and then there's a corresponding lower MOE number that each county has, and that's the actual MOE number that counties will be billed for from the state. So it is that MOE number after the general fund offset has been applied at the state level. In terms of the other offsetting revenue, so once you have each county's percent to total of the overall cost shift, that same percent to total is used to distribute the other offsetting revenue. Now this comes directly to counties. It's not incorporated into the MOE itself, but it's revenue that's available in the social services account to offset these increased IHSS costs. So for VLF growth, that's being redirected from health and mental health, and for sales tax growth, redirected from health and mental health, and from the accelerated caseload growth that's going to be flowing throughout the year, all of those, each county's percent to total of those offsetting revenues are based on the same percent to total that the methodology has come up with. The one offsetting revenue that differs is for CMSP counties, and that's just based on the percent to total of the increased costs specifically to those 35 counties, and that's used for that portion of the offsetting revenue. In terms of the offsetting revenue, the 16-17 growth that is redirected will then become part of the social services base in 17-18. So the counties will receive that redirected funds as growth from 16-17, and then as part of the base in 17-18, and both of those are used to offset these increased IHSS costs. And then one other important note, there is caseload owed from prior years. So these are actual costs that counties have incurred over the prior 2 years across the social services account. So whether it's IHSS, child welfare, foster care, even the CCS program is incorporated into that account. Counties are owed funds from the caseload growth that has occurred, and that's what sales tax growth is first used for, and that's not changing. So there will be enough sales tax growth from 16-17 to fully fund the caseload owed that is owed to counties from prior years, and then after that is paid off, then that determines what can be available to be sales tax growth that is redirected to offset IHSS costs. So that's the methodology in terms of how it was determined what each county's amounts of the increased IHSS costs and the offsetting revenue will be distributed out. The work group worked very hard on developing this, and we went through a thorough approval process. It was presented to the CSAC Executive Committee. They unanimously recommended that it be approved. It was presented to all CAOs. They unanimously approved it. And then the CSAC Board of Directors also then unanimously approved it. We have shared this methodology and the resulting county MOE amounts with the administration. We fully anticipate that they are moving forward to implement as adopted, and we're working in partnership with them on a couple of items that are beginning to move forward that we'll talk about a little bit later. So this methodology and this MOE is now moving forward with the administration.
Great, thanks, Justin. I want to jump in for a second and really talk about some of the real context for this and what the big takeaways may be for counties. Justin's going to touch on some of the specifics relative to the numbers here in a couple of minutes, but when we think about this as a whole, this really gets us to a place where it's manageable for counties in 17-18, and for the first couple of years here, we still remain with a long-term challenge with a 7% inflator and insufficient revenue to cover that. And so our efforts don't stop here today. We continue to work with the administration, and we continue to engage with our county leadership and the CAOs across the state as we continue to move forward on this conversation. I think it's also important to be clear that some of the revenues that are used to fund the IHSS cost shift are revenues that would have otherwise gone to health and mental health, as Justin noted. And so there is a loss of growth that is occurring for over the course of the next 5 years in both those areas. And it's one that we are very mindful of, and we think is critically relevant when we start thinking about how, when we reopen this deal in the next 2 years, and think about how it needs to be structured on a going forward basis. So that's a critical piece. I think the other part is that there are many complexities to put this whole deal together. We're touching on the MOE components of them today, but there are certainly more of them, particularly for all you that may be at the table bargaining with your IHSS providers. And so there is more that we all need to continue to talking about and working through over the coming months. The last thing that I would say is that our charge, first and foremost, is to ensure that there are sufficient resources that are available to fund the responsibilities that are transferred to us. And so that was a guiding principle of us throughout this process, continues to be present. And 1718 largely does that, and will continue to stay abreast of where things are heading. Since there is overall a dependence upon the economy and the performance of sales tax and vehicle license fees really to hold this all together. So with that, I want Justin to talk through some of the details of this specific to 1718 and what those numbers really mean.
Great, thanks, Graham. So we have shared the specific county MOE amounts with the administration, and we also distributed this out through CSAC a little bit ago, the same amount, the county MOE amounts that we have shared. That way counties can begin to see what their MOE amounts will be. Those will be needed to be updated slightly based on the final growth numbers that are coming in, but will certainly be close to what the actual final numbers are. And so those amounts reflect a couple of different things. It shows for each of the four components what the new county MOE amount is before the general fund offset. That number is important because when the 5% and then 7% inflator is applied to that number, not the number after the general fund offset. That document also shows the amount of the $400 million general fund that each county will receive, and then the final MOE after the general fund has been applied that each county has. And so those are really critical numbers for counties to have, and as soon as they're finalized and available, we'll certainly make sure to get those out to counties again so that you can have that and then be able to use it locally. And certainly working in partnership with the administration to get it out through their channels as well. So for 1718, the outlook is positive. You know, thinking back to where we were in January, or even what we thought with May, with some of the increased growth that has occurred, you know, counties are in a good position to be able to manage IHSS costs in 1718. Likely, you know, it's still difficult to determine the exact impact. There's still estimated revenue that kind of goes into determining what your actual county amount of increased costs will be compared to 1617, but it's looking that it'll be slightly better than what it would have been under the old MOE, and with the 3.5% there. And that's good news, but it's also important to keep in mind, as Graham said, you know, that is possible because of funds that have been redirected from other accounts and for other purposes. And so when counties look at that, and not just they're looking at specifically at IHSS costs, but keeping in mind the full fiscal picture for the county and what's occurred with health and mental health in order to be able to get to this point with offsetting IHSS costs at a pretty good level for the first year. There's a couple of exceptions to that. There's a unique situation with San Francisco that they are aware of and that we're working in partnership with them to address separately. Just a unique situation how their wage adjustment was handled. But other than that, counties for the most part are in a good range there in terms of being able to offset costs in the first year. For CMSP counties, they have a unique ability to be able to reserve CMSP growth funding to offset IHSS costs in future years. And this is really important because as the situation gets more difficult for counties to handle in the out years, for those 35 CMSP counties, they will have the ability to reserve some of this fund. So that's going to be a really important provision for them to be aware of and to be able to figure out how to manage locally, and we'll certainly work in partnership on helping to figure that out. For 2018-19, if it's still a little difficult to fully guess to fully anticipate the full impact in this first year, so it's even more difficult for that second year. But we anticipate that it would be manageable, that it'll certainly be more of a hit than in the first year, but something that counties will hopefully be able to manage, assuming the economy and the growth revenues still come in as expected. But after that, we know it'll get more difficult. The amount of general fund contribution from the state continues to go down. The inflator continues to go up, and then eventually even the amount of growth, redirected growth that's available goes down as well. So this will be unsustainable for counties in the out years, and that's why that reopener provision is so important. It gives us an opportunity to negotiate again with the administration and to find something that's going to work moving forward, past these first couple of years for California's counties. So I want to talk next about what are some of the next steps in terms of if you're out there in a county and you have an understanding now of the MOE and the methodology, what are the numbers that you're going to begin to get from the state, and how are you going to be able to work that locally into your budgets and other decisions that you need to make. So we are working in partnership with the Department of Finance related to the redirected VLF growth. So as these growth revenues are finalized, they need to be redirected into the social services account and allocated out based on the percentages that were determined with this methodology. And so we're working with them to ensure that that moves forward properly and that it's done accurately, and we're hoping that that information will be available and those revenues will be clear in the coming weeks. An important note on the redirected VLF growth is that part of the redirected funding will be related to AB 85. Now this redirected AB 85 growth is actually part of the $400 million general fund offset. So when counties receive this AB 85 as part of the redirected VLF growth, we'll need to be aware that this is something that's considered part of the $400 million. So the amount that will come straight from the general fund will be lowered by this amount, and it will equal $400 million total as a contribution from the state. But because that's going to come out differently than the $400 million, the rest of the $400 million that's being taken off the top at the state level, just want counties to be aware of this. We'll be sure to continue to emphasize this and how to handle it locally as these revenues become final and as this starts getting out to counties. The same process is underway for sales tax growth. Revenues are very close to being final, and in terms of determining the amount that can be redirected and what amount should go to each county based on the percentages that have been determined, that is something that we are also working in partnership with the Department of Finance with, and hope to have that out to counties in the coming weeks. For accelerated caseload growth, we have begun working with the Department of Finance on how that will work. So in terms of determining what amount of growth should be accelerated throughout the year, we want that number to be the best estimate possible. We don't want to accelerate more growth than there will be, but we also don't want to have less money going out to counties than they should have in order to offset these IHSS costs. So determining that amount, determining that process of how this will work, how it will be spread out over the year in terms of what goes to each county, that's something that we're also working in partnership on.
So just a quick comment on that. We're often faced in representing counties with the solution that moves in one direction or another. And the one direction is you can pursue a solution that is relatively simple, easy to explain, but often counties come out on the short end of the stick related to that. And so what you've seen through this and through the next set of information that we'll be sending out is a substantial amount of complexity in almost every part of the deal. And that was largely an attempt to try to have the most revenue available, to minimize the negative impacts as much as possible, to provide as much certainty to counties as we could possibly muster, and provide an opportunity that requires the administration to sit back down with us and work out a different long-term deal. And that only happens when we all work together. And this issue throughout the last 9 months has really highlighted the power that counties can have when we speak with one voice together. And so, as an example, there was the $400 million that Justin referenced in state general fund that was added in the May revise to offset the IHSS cost shift. That was the largest investment of state funds for any purpose in the May revise. So that's we've had a strong partnership with the administration, which certainly helps, but it's also about what we do together. So that's a critical piece. I also want to note that we've had a couple of references to bargaining. Justin's currently working on a document that's going to walk through all the elements related to bargaining, depending upon for counties, depending upon where you sit in terms of the minimum wage and what tools may be available to you, and what that may do to your MOE. As what we've just walked through is what the methodology is prior to any local bargaining that may be put into place that will then change your the total amount that you may owe to the state. So that's coming. I also want to note that we are pulling together an all-day IHSS only training that will walk through the high level and all of the intricate details related to this, so that folks have everything they need at a local level. And so that's being put together, will likely occur in mid-November. And so stay tuned for details related to that. And with that, I want to open it up. So I'm going to hand it back over to Jeff, and he's going to walk us through the question portion of the webinar. Jeff.
Thanks, Graham. We've had a couple of questions asking about whether the inflators apply to the pre-state general fund amount in the out years, or rather, whether the MOE applies prior to the state general fund offset or after.
Yep. So the inflator applies to the gross cost shift, which is to say the inflator applies to the higher number prior to the state general fund contribution. So for example, for 18-19, there's a $330 million state general fund component that will lower our cost shift. However, the 5% inflator will be based on what your MOE will be, assuming that we did not receive that $330 million. So it will be a higher number to the tune of $20 to $30 million for that year. And so, and that is an area that we continue to discuss with the administration. They have agreed to sit down and continue to talk with us about that relative to the 18-19 budget year in terms of developing that budget and going forward. Good question.
Will counties get a summary of how the fiscal year 17-18 caseload growth calculation will be changing to get the 2017-18 accelerated caseload growth?
Yes, there'll be a document that will highlight. There's two things that are relevant, I think, for this. The first is that the prior caseload growth that is due to you, so that those dollars are going to go out the door. The second will be that for the non-IHSS portions in that caseload growth, which has been about $30 million a year, that will be calculated in the same way and on the same timeline that it has been historically. So for the foster care portions and the CCS portions, those other portions of the mandated programs in the realignment, they'll continue to be reimbursed on the 2-year arrear cycle. So that will continue. For IHSS, the accelerated revenue amounts will be built into your initial realignment base at the outset of the year. And so what that does is that will draw down additional sales tax revenue to fund IHSS. So that'll be as part of the base. We will continue to make as much information available as we can get our hands on related to this, and share what we can related to that once the base has been set and those amounts are known. They are not known yet today in terms of what that exact impact would be in any given county, but we would hope to have that at some point this fall, and would share that with folks as much as possible. Justin, anything else to add to that?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay.
About the admin and public authority allocations, was there a statewide cap? The allocation numbers to this questioner appear lower than actual 12-month expenditures.
The IHSS admin and PA admin do have a cap, and so we have this sort of awkward structure whereby they're built into the MOE, and so there's an amount related to that, but there's also a reduction in the total amount of funding available for both administration and for PA admin. So there was about a $60 million, $70 million reduction to the administration components that was built into the MOE in the May revise. Half of that has been restored, but there is a reduction in admin. There's also a requirement in the trailer bill for the administration and Department of Social Services to work with us to develop a new methodology for funding admin, and that would be reflected in the 18-19 budget. So we have a one-year dip based upon what we've actually spent over the prior 12 months, and so that'll be capped in admin, but also an agreement with the administration where they need to develop a new methodology to fund admin beginning next year.
And just to add on to that, and to clarify what I said related to the most recent 12 months of expenditures that was available for admin and P-admin, by that I mean we calculated a percent to total for each county of that. So that percent to total was then applied to the specific amount of the cost shift that was related to admin or PA admin to determine how much each county should receive. So that was kind of the reference to the 12 months of the most recent expenditures data.
There's somebody looking for clarification about whether the local health and behavioral health departments, will they not be receiving any VLF growth or sales tax growth for the next 5 years?
Well, yes and no. So for community health and for both the health and the behavioral health amounts, there's no VLF growth for the next 3 years, and then they would receive half of what they would have otherwise received in years 4 and 5. For the sales tax growth, it's unclear. So it depends upon what the total performance is of sales tax, so how much growth actually comes in, how much is needed for IHSS. It's conceivable that if there's sufficient sales tax growth, that there would still be what's known as general growth that would go to health and behavioral health. So we won't know that until we get through the year, and I think actually there's a reconciliation that's required at the end of each year to really look at how the accelerated growth works over the course of the year, what the residual cost shift would be if there's any unfunded portion in IHSS, and what the implications may be for the health and mental health accounts as well. And so we will look at that, and we will work through that along with our affiliates, the welfare directors, the behavioral health directors, and the Health Executives Association. So we will all, and CAPA, so we will all be working together to ensure that there's an understanding of where we end in the year. But the sales tax growth isn't completely ruled out. Although I would say, if you look ahead, once you get to years 3 and out, there is not enough revenue that is projected to be available to fund the IHSS cost shift. And if there's not enough for that, there's not going to be enough for really any other purpose. So that underscores the need for us to have all of us together to work to have a more workable place in years 3 and out.
Speaking of working together, will there be a reopening for the discussion of reimbursement for admin costs this year?
I think the admin door is closed for the current year, and so half of the proposed cut was restored. We were successful in that. The key related to admin is that the administration is required to develop a new budgeting methodology. That's the key related to that. The budgeting methodology that exists currently for admin uses county costs from 2001, and as a result, since none of us are actually funding or paying costs as if it's 2001, since it's 2017, and there's been a lot of cost increase, as a result, the calculation that the administration does is woefully inadequate. So that's required to be revisited and built into next year's budget, and we'll be actively part of that conversation.
Can you please clarify again if the AB 85 related offsets will also impact the base for the social services accounts?
The AB 85 offsets will not go into the social services account base. So if there's a specific amount of 16-17 growth that's considered AB 85, and that's part of the $400 million general fund. So that amount, so 400 million minus that amount will be what counties receive from essentially straight general fund contribution. Now, since that amount's growth, it then is received again as, would be received again as base, but it does not go into the base. It will again be taken out from the $400 million general fund. So the $400 million general fund final contribution will be minus the 16-17 AB 85 growth. Then you minus it again as if it were 17-18 base, and then you subtract out what would be the 17-18 AB 85 growth. And then once those three things are taken out of the $400 million general fund, the rest of the state contribution will come in to equal exactly the $400 million. And obviously, since that's taken off the top of the state level to begin with, it'll be reflected in the MOE amount, and then if there is a reconciliation at the end of the year in order to ensure that that's exactly $400 million, that will occur.
So do you have the level of expenditures for all counties on the admin side that can be sent out so that they can calculate the percent to total?
Mm-hmm. So we worked in partnership with CWDA and with CAPA in terms of looking specifically at the admin expenditures and the PA admin expenditures and calculating the percent to total on that, and that was done as part of the development of the methodology, and that's what's incorporated in and has been shared with the administration as the MOE amounts.
Will CMSP growth funds increase the base for CMSP or for the counties that will receive the funding?
The CMSP, those dollars will increase the base for each county that receives it. So it's revenue that would have otherwise gone to support the CMSP board and will instead be going to fund the IHSS cost shift. And so for every dollar that those counties receive, it would be permanently built into their realignment base on a going forward basis.
Great, thank you. Will the base be reset for the growth that is redirected?
So for the health and mental health accounts, as I believe that this question is trying to ask, for the health and mental health accounts, the amount that is redirected will not go back to health and mental health on a going forward basis. So once realignment revenue sits in one of the accounts, the social services, the health or the mental health accounts, it cannot permanently be moved to any of the others. And so for example, in year one, if you were a county and you had $500,000 in what would have been mental health growth from the VLF, that instead is going to fund IHSS, it will permanently go to fund IHSS. And that was something the administration built into the overall deal, and they built it into the overall deal based upon their stated priority of IHSS being the highest priority within overall realignment to fund first, and second, I think some level of recognition that if the dollars didn't remain there, it would increase the shortfall even further in some of the out years, which would put counties in the position of having to do a significant amount of transfers between the realignment accounts, which requires a local public hearing. So as a result, the dollars will move, but they will move on a permanent basis to fund IHSS. And what that practically means is it's in the social services account within realignment, and so it doesn't have a specific linkage to IHSS because realignment isn't structured that discreetly, but rather all the social services programs within the realignment those dollars would go underneath that umbrella.
Can you give more information on the ability for CMSP counties to reserve funding for future years?
As we were negotiating the trailer bill, one of the things that we thought was important was that for the CMSP board growth that is being redirected, that those counties have the ability to use it over multiple years to the degree it's not needed all in year one. And the thought was that there may be sufficient revenue to fully cover the cost shift in those counties in the first year, but there may not be in year 2, and there certainly won't be in year 3. And so the SB 90 includes language that allows for multi-year spending authority over those dollars. And so there's not a structure that's built in for that, but it would allow a county, a CMSP county, to hold those dollars in 17, 18 and use them in a subsequent year.
So we have somebody who wrote in saying that they still don't understand how a county knows what its administrative and PA cap amounts are. Can you explain where they would see this?
I believe each county will see that when the IHSS admin, PA admin allocation letter goes out. I think it'll be part of that document that each county would receive. So Justin, I don't know if you're involved in that, but I do know that there are some of our affiliates are involved in that specific allocation and the timing related to it, which I think is in the next month or so.
Somebody asks, is this statement correct? The redirected mental health and public health sales tax and VLF dollars will impact the social services base amount.
Yes. If we both agree, that's
You get
good.
a one-word answer in stereo. Can you please provide more information regarding the 10% over 3 years or $12.10 or higher wage?
Yes, so we, as Graham mentioned, there are a number of kind of new bargaining provisions, new tools, but also new requirements and limitations that are incorporated into the overall IHSS agreement. We are working to put together a document that outlines those so that counties are aware of these tools. We know that the majority of counties are currently in bargaining and certainly want to understand what these new tools are and to be able to use them locally as they see fit to meet their local needs. So we're working with certainly all the entities involved with bargaining as well as the Department of Social Services to ensure that we're all on the same page with how all the questions and how all those tools are understood by all the entities involved, just to make sure that counties have accurate information about how they will be implemented by the department and how they can be used locally. In terms of the 10% over 3 years, so that would be something that would be only available to a county that is at or above the state participation cap of $12.10 an hour, which of course will rise to $1.10 above the minimum wage as the minimum wage goes up. And it is a new way for a county to gain state participation in a wage increase that is above the state participation cap, something that was not possible before. And that's limited, and that state participation would come in at the normal 65-35 sharing ratio, but it's limited to an amount that is a 10% increase over the county provider wage over a 3-year period, and then it can only be used twice, so 2 3-year periods, and the second 3-year period cannot begin until that first 3-year period ends. So this is something that is new, it's available, that's how it would work. Certainly going to continue to be in conversations with more specifically how it will work and how that information is given out to counties about how they can use, what the process is in terms of getting those rates approved and all of that. It's definitely something that we're continuing to work on.
Yeah, I think one of the goals of the trailer bill in this deal is to ensure that there's some level of an incentive or a mechanism for local bargaining to continue with IHSS providers. So the labor folks that were involved in this deal were certainly focused on that, particularly for those counties that were in 2 different camps. Those that were that are at minimum wage, and to provide an incentive for them to go above it or to go ahead of a minimum wage change. And so there's some bargaining provisions that are specific to that. And those that are above the participation cap already and are would otherwise be faced with the 100% county share of cost to the degree that they bargain for anything. And so that 10% floating cap provides some mechanism to draw down some state dollars for that local bargaining in those 2 3-year periods of time that Justin referenced.
For IHSS admin and PA admin, they were told that the state would no longer pay the county share, so the state will have a state general fund cap in addition to a county share, and the state will somehow reconcile?
I think that sounds about right. Yes, I think the admin is really tricky because there's both the MOE component of it where there's a cost to us related to it, but we do simultaneously have state sharing related to admin, and so there are multiple elements of admin, and we'll need to. This is not going to be an easy thing to track. It's going to be a difficult thing for those of you that are in the claiming area of your counties, and we would continue to work with CWGA on the IHSS admin side, with CAPA on the public authority admin side, given some of the complexities related to that, where you basically have costs and revenues moving in multiple directions simultaneously with an overall capped allocation. So it's that portion of it is really complicated and will be tricky to manage as we move through this year. What I suspect is that there may need to be some level of course corrections in order to get it right. And so to the degree that it looks a little funky for you locally, please let us know and let the other affiliates know, and we can continue to work on this issue.
A reminder that you can always email your questions to Justin at the email address that's on your screen. So another question, the CMSP growth would be deposited into their regular sales tax account?
The CMSP growth that is redirected will go into the sales tax, the social services sales tax account. Yes. So that portion, as we discussed earlier, would be permanently redirected for that purpose to support IHSS.
When can counties expect to have the bargaining document you are working on?
We are working on it as quickly as possible. It's really important that we are all on the same page with the other entities involved in the bargaining and the Department of Social Services, so that we all have a consistent understanding of what these provisions are, how they will be implemented, and how counties can utilize them. So that's an important part of the process that needs to occur before we can confidently share a document that states how these provisions will be implemented and available to counties. But it's definitely a top priority. We're aware of how many counties are in the middle of bargaining and want to get this out to counties as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, one of the timing constraints is that, or the element of it that we do not control is, is on the administration side. So we're working as quickly as possible to have a working draft that we believe accurately reflects how the bargaining provisions would work, and then are continuing to have conversations with the administration such that we can all very quickly get on that same page. So we're hopeful that you'll see something here in the very near future, and we will broadly distribute that so all folks within counties that need to have it would have their hands on it the moment that we have that finalized, and where all parties have agreed to it.
When is the accelerated payment going to be released?
So there's no specific timeline yet. The first month that it would have been possible would be this next month in terms of the realignment year. And so once that whole process can be finalized and then the specific monthly amounts determined, that'll go into place. If there's a month or two that has been missed, as this has been worked out to ensure it's done correctly, there'll be some catch up to those 1 or 2 months that are missed. So hopefully soon, with only 1 or 2 months being missed and then caught up through the process.
So what folks can expect is the first thing you're going to get is the payment for your prior caseload growth that's already owed. So that's a cash check that you will receive related to those prior costs. So that'll go out first. Then there'll be the monthly regular payments for realignment. So those dollars will go out the door related to the base. The accelerated revenue should very quickly follow that, and as Justin mentioned, that hopefully is in October, but it could be in November if it's not resolved in sufficient time to allow the controller to incorporate that into the schedules.
And we're just going to do one more question. Apologize to the others that we aren't able to get to. How are negotiations in progress going to affect the 400 million distribution or the methodology?
Current negotiations will not impact the amount of state general fund that you will receive. The MOE will, your MOE, each county's MOE will be set for 17-18 for purposes of the share of the state general fund support. And so that'll be a fixed number, so it won't change there. What will change though is what the total cost may be in that county to the degree that you bargain and have an impact that increases your overall MOE. And that could have implications for 18-19 and beyond in terms of both what your total costs are and how they may grow with the inflator, but also what your share of the total revenues that are available may be. And we will spend more time talking about that specifically when we get to our training in November. To really get through some of the implications for 18-19 and beyond of what how the MOE may change from county to county and how that may impact the overall total, your share of the overall revenues.
Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar and thank Justin and Graham for sharing their expertise with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.